Please join me in welcoming Bill McRaven. Chancellor, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Great. Yes, sir. So, I asked you to do this long enough ago that I thought this was going to be a higher ed wake. I was going to bring a bottle of Bushmills. We were going to do shots, lamenting...
You can still do that, you know.
We can still do that. Lamenting the awful session that higher ed had. And then there at the last minute, somehow, higher ed snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. What happened? Because all the reporting up until the end was, you guys were going to get it worse than anybody.
Yeah, well, we've got to start off by thanking the legislators for recognizing, continuing to recognize the value of higher education.
Better late than never. Right?
But I'm not sure I would say it was always late in the session. I mean, you have to realize, as Barry McBee always tells me, it's a long game. So, so when you start off at the beginning of the session, you look at SB 1 and you go, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This is, some of my presidents were just catatonic when they looked at the results of the budget. But it's a long game. So the thought that all of a sudden we came in at the 11th hour and 59th minute and cured the problem, I don't think is the case.
Not exactly right, but you stipulate, though, you accept that most of the time we did think it was probably trending in a bad direction.
I think what we saw was it started off in a very bad position, and over time we began to see some momentum moving in the right direction. And of course, as we continued to have discussions with members, you could see that they had a better appreciation for the need to support our healthcare and our GAIs as well, our academic institutions. But I will admit that very late in the game, all this kind of came together. So I think the appearance from the public was, all of a sudden, it just all,
Right. There's always a story behind the scenes
and there's a story behind the scenes
we don't see. So let's go through, if you don't mind, the byproduct of this session, the things that were positive from the standpoint of higher ed.
Sure.
We can talk specifically about the UT system campuses and some of the things that maybe did not work. The funding piece has got to be the best news of all, because the cuts that were projected really until at least halfway through this session, would have taken every public university campus in the state. It was a 6 to 10% haircut. Maybe in some cases it was worse. Most of your campuses, it looks like maybe RGV got it the worst of the group.
So RGV and Permian Basin both took about a 10% cut.
Right, but other campuses held constant, kind of the old flat is the new up rule, right? If you held, that's almost like an improvement, and then in some cases, almost a modest increase over the last biennium.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the case. But there's some bigger issues here. One, the way that the money was being distributed was also of concern to us. So when you looked on the Senate side, their ability to kind of manage the formula funding, and as you know, for us, the formula funding really is the lifeblood for our institutions.
Indeed.
The House side, we kind of liked their approach much better. And again, when they came to conference, they realized that the money in the Senate bill was, in some cases, for some of our institutions, was a little better, but the process and the way the House managed the formula funding was better for us. So a conference came together, and I think they both agreed that the best way to handle this was to use kind of the House approach to the formula funding, which was, again, important to us because it allows for the growth. So those campuses that do have growth, if you're pumping money into the formula, then you're going to be able to see a modest increase where appropriate. The special items, of course, were of great interest to us. And the term special item really is a bit of a misnomer, and it's something we're going to have to work through in the interim. One of the directions we've got is we need to pull together, there's going to be a task force to look at special items to figure out how do you bend these things.
Chancellor, for the benefit of the uninitiated, what exactly is a special item? Because I looked at the list of things that were under that heading, and like the McDonald Observatory, is it not?
That's correct.
Is a special item. And by the way, even though much of higher ed did well this session, it looks like the McDonald Observatory did take a cut.
Well, it did, and I think
more than 25%.
And so Greg Finvez is going to have to figure out, how we're going to continue to fund McDonald, because that is one of the real crown jewels of the state of Texas.
But special items are things that are what?
Well, they are non-formula things.
Non-formula.
So when and this is the term that the legislature came up with at the end game was. We need to look at in the interim how we're going to deal with these non-formula revenue that the state provides us. So when you think of special items, clearly you think of something that's concrete like McDonald Observatory. But special items also go towards enhancing the academic institutions. So there is money that's going in for operating costs that are above and beyond the formula in some cases for academic excellence. Well, we've got to figure out that is not a special item.
These are not frills.
Oh no, absolutely.
Where if you remove them, we're good. In fact, removing them in some cases will disable real programs going on at these institutions.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we'll look at in the interim is which of these special items really need to be sunsetted.
And you make that point, Chancellor, that what happened at the end here was they kicked the conversation around formula funding and the conversation around special items to a discussion topic during the interim.
Yeah,
right?
and I think it'll be more than a discussion topic. And so I applaud their approach to this, which, again, the first time I've had a chance to see this, which was they don't let you off the hook. They don't say, well, okay, this was a good session, good on you guys, and we'll fight this battle next session.
Right.
What they have specifically said is, you've got homework to do in the interim. And we expect when the next session comes around, you better have some answers for us, or we're going to come back at the special items with a vengeance.
Let me take the bait here. You mentioned that the Senate had a dimmer view of higher ed funding in this session, and ultimately the House's view prevailed. Let me remove the manhole cover and usher you into the manhole. What is the problem with the Senate?
No,
Will you say bad things about the Senate for all of us here?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
But I will not say bad things because I don't think bad things need to be said. I think people are surprised when I say, I really enjoyed the session. And people go, how is that possible?
Right.
But I enjoy it because I love the give and take. I like to go to the hearings. I like for the members to ask hard questions. The Senate Higher Ed ask hard questions. The Senate Finance ask hard questions. And we have great relationships, great dialogue off camera with a lot of these members.
You're totally not answering my question.
Of course I'm not.
No.
I did go to journalism school.
I understand that. Yeah, I do. Good.
Yeah,
And good for you. I want to understand, though, why the Senate takes a dimmer view of higher ed than the House, at least as far as the appropriation proposed in this session goes. Why do they think you should get less than the House does?
Well, again, I think you need to ask them. And you're talking about you're going up to Dallas here soon.
Yeah.
Ask some of those House members why they think that's the case.
Yeah.
But I think there was a difference in philosophy and ideology, I think, going in. The Senate looked at it and they said, hey, we're a little bit more ideologically conservative in terms of fiscally conservative. We think that we can pare back higher education and you can still get the same value. For us in higher education, it's always a case of how do you balance price and value and cost. Recognizing that there is what you're going to pay for tuition, what it costs to go to school, what it costs for us to do that, and what's the value you get from that.
Yeah.
This is a constant balance on the part of all the presidents.
But Chancellor, isn't there a version of this story that ends with people acknowledging that the Senate in particular has taken the view for a number of years that higher ed generally, not UT system, doesn't do a particularly good job of spending the money it's getting now, which is one of the reasons they're reluctant to give you more, and part B is it's one of the reasons they want to constrain your ability to get more revenue from the consumer. Because another thing that did not happen this session, although the Senate attempted to do it, it ended up dying in the House, they attempted to freeze tuition.
Right.
At the same time that they were talking about giving you less, while the population is growing and higher ed enrollment is growing, they wanted to give you less from the state and they wanted to constrain your ability to get more money from the consumer.
Sure. But again, I think this is a little bit of the check and balance that you expect from the House and the Senate side. Right. The fact of the matter is, by forcing us to look at these issues the way the Senate did, it does force us to go back and say, I don't know, can we cut? Yeah. Can we give you a better price on your tuition? Can we figure out how to not continue to raise costs? How are we going to take these cuts and deal with them?
Yeah.
Had that not happened, had the Senate not forced our hand, if you will, in looking at these issues, I don't know that we would have been successful in the 11th hour.
So they're giving you the discipline that you feel like ultimately benefits.
I think you always need that kind of discipline.
So let me come at the question of the tuition freeze from a different way. They seem to believe, in fact, members of the Senate, maybe the Lieutenant Governor himself has said, that we have an affordability problem in higher ed. As somebody who is paying out-of-state tuition to another state's university system, I would love to have the affordability problem of paying for UT tuition.
Sure.
I mean, the fact is, what it costs to get an education in any of your campuses is really, relatively speaking, not that much. Where is the affordability problem? What am I missing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question because when you take a look at UT Austin, for example, our flagship institution, and you compare it to the 15 other flagships that are within our bucket, if you will, we are the 12th least expensive. And I mean, we're number 12 down the list. It costs about $10,000 a year in tuition and fees to go to the flagship university.
Yeah.
That's a deal that is hard to beat.
Yep.
Does that mean that we can't improve and make cuts in certain areas and continue to try to drive costs down? No, of course not. I think we have an obligation to do that.
Yeah. And particularly, I assume, Chancellor, on some of the regional campuses, there may be even more of an opportunity to provide a real bargain price for a good education.
Well, the regional campuses, I think, provide absolutely the best.
Right.
I mean, you take a look at UTEP and RGV and Tyler. I mean, they provide an incredible value for going to any of those institutions.
Yeah.
And their peer comparisons are off the chart in terms of their affordability.
Right.
So, but again, I get back to this idea of the Senate disciplining us. I think it's a good way to do business. I like being challenged because it forces us to look at the hard issues.
Okay, so we like the fact that the funding was not as bad as you thought. We like the fact that tuition didn't get frozen. I also know that you and the other chancellors have signed a letter saying how enthusiastically you supported the sex assault on campus legislation. That was an unfortunately necessary byproduct of events. It's been a persistent problem on campuses before it was in the headlines, but you all believe that this legislation, Senator Watson and others who were leaders on this is actually going to move the ball significantly.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we at the University of Texas did what we referred to as the class report, the Cultivating Learning in a Safe Environment. Spent about 18 months taking a hard look at the data on all of our campuses. And this was uncomfortable. And our intent was to make it uncomfortable, to shine the light on some very ugly issues. But at the end, you can't fix the problem if you don't have good data to point you in the right direction. And the data was not, I will tell you, unfortunately, it was surprising in some respects, not surprising in others. But the fact of the matter is we have to do something about sexual assault on campus.
You feel like you have the true magnitude of the problem in your grasp. One of the concerns that a lot of people who observe this issue have had is that this problem has existed, but people are not aware of the magnitude because people have been unwilling to come forward, unable to come forward, and that the universities have not provided an environment in which they could feel comfortable coming forward. So in fact, the data collection is hampered by that, by the culture on campus.
Yeah, I think you have to work on all of those. I mean, the fact of the matter is you have to have a multi-pronged attack on a lot of fronts. One of them is campus culture always. I will tell you, in general, I know in talking to all of the presidents how committed they are to addressing the sexual assault issue. So that was never an issue. From the leadership down, they're all about getting after this problem. But they recognize, frankly, it requires more resources. It does require more focus. It is something that you can never take your eye off the ball on. If you do, then all of a sudden it begins to waver back in the wrong direction. By having this class report in front of us, now it gives us some areas where we know we have to attack and attack aggressively to drive that down to zero.
Okay. So those were all good byproducts of the session, relatively speaking.
Well, again, we started this long before the session.
No, I know, but the legislation, you feel good about that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about some of the things that did not happen or did happen that maybe you don't have as much of a good feeling about. You wanted to see, and have wanted to see almost from the moment you got in the job, the top 10% or top 7%, whatever UT is a little bit different than others, that rule go away. You believe that has hampered the ability for UT to be the elite institution that it could be.
Yeah, what I've said all along is I think we have to have a discussion about it. And after the Fisher ruling in particular, I think we needed to have that discussion. I'm sorry we didn't have a more fulsome discussion during this session.
Why don't you think something happened on that? I mean, there was obviously an attempt to make something happen on that. What happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer for you other than to say that there are members that are concerned not so much about whether or not the 10% helps the underrepresented minorities. I think what we've been able to show over time is that it has not dramatically affected certainly the African American percentage.
Speaking of data, the data does not point to this as an unqualified success.
That's correct. However, what the data does show us, though, is that those young men and women in the rural areas get an opportunity to go to our flagship institution. My concern all along has been about the students. And I think sometimes people have viewed this and said, well, you just want to drive UT Austin to the top of the U.S. News and World Report. I said, no, you're missing the point. The point is some of these young men and women that come in from rural schools or urban schools that may or may not be as good as some of the other schools, but they're in the top 10%. Well, they show up at UT Austin and they say, I want to go to McCombs, or I want to go to the Cockrell School of Engineering. And we have to say, well, I'm sorry, young man, young lady, that's not going to happen because you came in with an 1100 SAT and a 3.2 GPA. That will not get you into McCombs, and that will not get, because your college is not guaranteed. Your admission into UT Austin is, but your college is not.
Do you feel like, Chancellor, that you've been put in the position of having to admit kids who, if there were no such requirement, you would not consider to be UT material?
Well, I think everybody can be UT material. The question is, where do you as an individual want to go? And I get back to this point. If you want to come in and be a great engineer, but you come in with 1100 SAT, you're competing against kids that are coming in with 1300 SAT that maybe have had a more rigorous high school. So at the end of the day, everybody can be a UT student. I am convinced of that.
Right.
But how about if you decide to go to UT Dallas instead, where it's 1130, I think, SAT to get into their engineering school, somewhere around that neighborhood, and you'll come out with a great engineering degree. Why not go to UT Arlington? Why not go to UTSA? Why not go to UT El Paso? There are other opportunities where some kids could come in if they really want to be engineers and not journalism majors.
Right.
Because right now, with the SAT score I had coming in, I would have been in the School of Undergraduate Studies, great opportunity, but I would have had to go into the liberal arts.
Do you think that this rule, last question on this, do you think that the 10% rule is hampering UT's ability, forget about the rankings as far as it goes, but just to be an elite institution? In other words, is it a trade-off as a consequence of this between being a school for Texans, for the masses, for everybody, and a school that, kids who are going out of state to some of the elite publics and some of the elite privates might actually want to go to if only you were able to be more in control of the admissions?
Well, what we certainly see is a little bit of a brain drain from some of our high school candidates that decide to go elsewhere when they can't get into UT, Austin in particular. Now, they may go in-state, they may go to TCU, they may go to Baylor, they may go somewhere else, but because they weren't in the top 10%, they're not able to get into UT Austin, or they may go to a California system. What you've seen with California, for example, is they're beginning to reverse the trend. They were heavy somewhere in the high 20s or low 30s in terms of the out-of-state coming to the California institutions. What does that do for them? Well, it generates revenue, but it also brings in some cases, it's so competitive, it brings in higher quality students, if you will, in terms of their academic quality. But now what California has said is, we need to reverse that trend. We need more California kids coming to California schools.
Right.
The question is, do we have the right balance here in Texas? I would offer that we could probably increase the out-of-state by about another 5%, so go from 10%, because we are mandated 10%. If we went to 5%, we would still be serving the people of Texas.
So you're saying go from 10 to 15?
I'm sorry, go from 10. I'm sorry, go from 10% to 15% in terms of out of state. That would do a couple things. Would it generate more revenue? It would.
Because out-of-state tuition right now versus in-state tuition is, what's the multiple? 4 times? 4x?
3x, something like that. But also it is, you're competing. Right. From out of state to come to UT, again, you're getting kids that have got very deep SAT scores, are going to be going to, the engineering schools and the chemistry schools and those sort of things. And again, not to say that the kids coming in with the lower SATs like mine or higher SATs but want to do something different, that's great.
You're going to keep pressing this.
Absolutely.
You expect that legislators, if they're the ones who ultimately have their hands on this and they're hearing from their constituents, our kids can't get into UT, you have any reason to think that they're going to change this in the end? I mean, because they're hearing from their people. That's the thing. They're not going to vote for the out-of-state people over their own constituents, are they?
No, and nor should they. I mean, they ought to be focused on the men and women, young men and women in their districts. I don't disagree with that. But again, I think it gets back to this balance of if you continue to see a decrement in state appropriations, you've got to generate revenue somehow. If you want to increase the overall kind of rankings of the university, you probably need to ensure that the kids coming in have higher SATs to some degree and higher GPAs. But at the same time, we have an obligation to educate the young men and women in Texas. That is our first and foremost obligation, and we can never lose sight of that. I want to get back to something you said, about kids coming to UT. Everybody that comes to UT ought to be there. And we can take any young man or woman that comes in, and we can educate them as well as they will get anywhere in the nation. So I am comfortable. I don't care if you come in with I keep pointing to myself because my wife keeps saying, would you stop saying that publicly, that you had a low SAT score? I said, well, it is true.
You've transcended your limitations. Just think about that.
But I get back to the fact that I came in with a low SAT score, probably with a lower GPA than I should. But what happened was you get to school, you put your nose to the grindstone, you have great faculty that help you through the rough spots. You find out which degree program matches you, because I started off in pre-med. That did not work.
Right.
I went to accounting. That really didn't work. And then all of a sudden I found my niche in journalism.
Yeah, we'll take anybody.
Yes.
Right, that's how that goes.
But the reality of the matter was, and in some cases, it's just the reverse.
Yeah.
Some kids come in and they say, I want to be a liberal arts major, and they find out that it's not a good fit for them, and all of a sudden they go into engineering. Right. So I think every young man and woman that comes in can get a great degree. We can educate them, and I think that's irrespective of their SAT or their GPA.
Let me ask you about Hazelwood. Given the conversation last session and this session about the bill that you're being handed, basically, this unfunded mandate, not that we disrespect the veterans or the people who've been promised something, but you all are being given an unfunded mandate to the tune of $200 million every year at a time when you don't have enough, you say, to do all the things you want to do. Right. Why won't the legislature just step up and deal with this?
Well, to set the facts straight, for us within the UT system, it's about between $48 and $50 million across the UT system.
I'm thinking about about higher ed.
Right, the state as a whole, you're correct.
Yeah.
And the issue for me, and of course, I see some of our great supporters of veterans organizations here, and I used to take great pride in saying that I was the senior vet in the state of Texas. I am no longer, as Mark Welch has come in to run the Bush School at Texas A&M, great former Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is, it is an unfunded mandate. And it's not that we don't want to support our vets. Absolutely we do. And I think we've got great programs to support our vets. But when you take a look at UT Austin, it'll run between $10 and $15 million a year in terms of this unfunded mandate.
Yep.
And San Antonio is about $10 million as well. Well, that's real money. So what we've got to do is we've got to find the balance between supporting our vets, the obligation the state of Texas has made to the vets, but at the same time finding the revenue to take care of the tuition offsets that occur as a result of the Hazelwood.
And again, like top 10%, that's something that you're going to come back to again next session. That conversation is going to continue. Do you think higher ed, Chancellor, leave UT system out of it necessarily if you want to, you can. Just generally, is higher ed doing a good job in Texas? Because there does seem to be this persistent conversation around how, we always want to be first and best at everything in Texas. We like to puff our chests out and talk about exceptionalism in Texas. But our higher ed performance is fine. Our graduation rates are getting a little bit better. In fact, there's been some real progress within the UT system, I know, but generally our graduation rates are fine. If you look at the 8th grade cohort studies that are done every year, we're still only graduating about 1 out of every 5 Texas kids who enters public school in the 8th grade by the time that they're 6 years out from high school. Why can't we do better? Or do you think, maybe I should ask that as a question, do we need to do better?
Well, we always need to do better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a simple answer.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I think when you take a look at higher ed nationwide, so let's start nationwide, there is no better investment in this country than higher education, with one exception, pre-K through 12. We have to invest in our primary and secondary education. We have to as a nation. We have to as a state.
Right.
I was asked last year, I was up in New York City and was doing a higher ed interview with Bloomberg. But they had the national security reporter was in there as well, and he wanted to talk to me about Syria and some of these other things. And so finally, after the higher ed folks were through, the national security guy says, well, Admiral? So he changes me from Chancellor to
Admiral. You're in trouble.
And he says, well, Admiral, what do you think the number one national security issue is?
Right.
And I said, pre-K through 12. And he said, no, I mean the number one national security issue. I said pre-K through 12. If we do not take the opportunity to educate our young men and women at an early age, then one, they are not going to be college ready. They are not going to be educated in a world that requires a liberal in the broader sense of the word.
Non-political sense.
Non-political sense, a liberal education. They are not going to be educated in the STEM fields. They are not going to have an understanding of history. They are not going to have an understanding of politics. We have got to take the opportunity to educate these young men and women early and often.
So the legislature, which did not for the second consecutive session fund high-quality pre-K to the degree that the governor or advocates wanted to, what they should have done is taken money from higher ed and put it in pre-K.
And I'd be okay with that.
Because pre-K is more important than higher ed, as you say it.
It is. I agree.
Really?
Yep.
Do you think people appreciate what you said initially, that higher ed is so important to this? I mean, leaving us the pre-K piece aside. I mean, you're creating the next workforce, you're creating the next core of leaders in all aspects of society, and yet higher ed, public ed, and healthcare are the big spends in the state budget. Whenever it comes to going after one of those three, higher ed is always the one in the crosshairs. If you ask the public which is the most important of the three, higher ed is always third of three. Why is the perception of higher ed not in line with the importance of higher ed?
Well, I think
Are you not doing a good job marketing yourselves?
Well, I think that is part of it. But I think there's also, when you take a look at what do you get when you come to a great school, whether it's A&M or Austin or any of the other schools around the state, you get an education not necessarily in the technical field in which you come in. You get a life education. You know, I take a look at my 4 years at UT Austin, and it wasn't so much about what I learned as a journalism major. It was how I learned to deal with my college roommate, how I learned to deal with the faculty, how I had to stand in lines to do adds and drops. How do you deal with failure when you fail a test? And 4 years to make all the mistakes you can make and grow as an individual.
By the way, something you can't get if you simply do higher ed online.
Well, that's the point.
One of the discussions of the future of higher ed is we need to move more of this stuff online, but you lose all that socialization stuff that you just talked about.
But it is also, sometimes when you look at higher ed and you look at the football programs and the baseball programs and the basketball programs, and you look at, if you are on the outside and you're looking in, and you say, how come the kids aren't in the classroom 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? How come they're out, watching football games, baseball games? Well, this is part of the education. This is part of the socialization. This is part of the engagement that you have to have.
Right.
And that is a part of education. But I think it is sometimes viewed with a little bit of suspicion.
Right.
That, well, it's a Saturday afternoon. Why aren't kids in class? Why are they going to football games? Wait a second. Do you not understand that the value of higher education is much more than just the technical skills you're going to walk away with?
This is of a piece. It's all of a piece.
Absolutely.
Right. So let me transition from the state of higher ed to the state of McRaven. You've been in the job now for a little less than 2.5 years. You've got a little bit more than 6 months left on your contract with the system. Are you in a position now to look back over that time and say, here are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that I consider to be successes during my tenure? What are the high points? If you're articulating where you think you've done well in this job, what are the things that you think have been successes?
Well, any new leader that comes in, certainly in my experience in the military, is you come in as a leader and your objective is not to solve all the problems on your watch. The objective is to make the institution better for the next guy or gal that comes in. So you look at the long term. You have to look at the long term. So, when I came in, there were some immediate problems that I had to deal with. And candidly, this was the relationship between the board, the system administration, and UT Austin, our flagship. And everybody kind of knows the background on that.
Right.
But that was job one for me right up front. How do you deal with this? How do you get things back on track? And I like to think now, Greg Finviz and I have a great personal and professional relationship. We are good friends. We spend a lot of time together. The relationship between the system and Austin, I think, is as strong as it has been. And I give, frankly, Greg Finviz great credit for that as well. His outreach to me, Greg texts me, he emails me. We talk on a routine basis about all the issues involving Austin, as I do, frankly, with a lot of the other presidents. But you had to kind of solve that. That was kind of the immediate problem. But the long-term thing was, how do we get system administration aligned better with the campuses? And this is one of the things we did. Right up front, we did an organizational assessment to find out what do the campuses really need from system administration. What are the areas where we are really value added, and then what are the areas where we are not value added? If you take a look at the work that has happened, irrespective of what you see in the press, we started 18 months ago reducing the full-time employees of the system. So by the time we hit calendar year, by the time we hit this fall, we will have reduced the number of full-time employees at the system by well over 160 full-time employees. There's not another agency in the state of Texas that has reduced.
So you've taken a number, because this is a point of criticism, system bloat. You hear about system bloat. So you're down 160, you said?
By the time we get to fall.
Down to about how many now?
So, we started at 924, minus 160. Never do public math.
Right.
So the
760 and or 860, 760.
Right, and so a lot of
two journalism majors doing math. We bring the entertainment to you every time we come here. So you've cut a significant percentage.
We have, and we're continuing to look at things like how do we outsource some of the other things that we bring. So how do we outsource our facilities and planning? How do we outsource some of our general counsel? How do we outsource? There may be opportunities to continue to reduce that.
This is something, by the way, that other system campuses, if Sharp were up here, he'd be bragging about how he's spent all of his time as chancellor at the A&M system, outsourcing, how our overhead percentage is so awesome. you feel like you've got work to do to catch up on some of that stuff?
No, it's a different model. I mean, what you have to understand is, we are 4 times larger than any other system in the state of Texas in terms of our budget. So we're, almost 18 billion. I think A&M's about 4.2 billion, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And I think John Sharp's done a magnificent job. Again, John and I have a good relationship, very strong relationship.
But there's not an analogy here, really.
But again, you've got to be careful about the analogies. It's a little bit of apples and oranges.
Did you cut the number of employees because it was the right thing to do, or did you cut it in response to everybody crawling up your nose about it?
No, again, this goes back to, we started 6 months into my tenure taking a look at aligning the organization. Now, I wasn't naive that there was concerns about the bloat in the system, but it wasn't about making the system more efficient necessarily. It was about making us more effective. Yeah. How are we more effective to the campuses that we're supporting?
But Chancellor, you've been doing this, you say, for 6 months, since 6 months in. So you've been doing this for about 2 years.
We have been, yep.
So the new regents who came aboard earlier this year, who have obviously been aware of the work's been going on in the system, right?
No, not necessarily. So again, you have
they, as you know, 2 of those new regents, Regent Longoria and Regent Eltife, have been among the loudest and most public in complaining about the growth of the system bloat, the inefficiencies in the system, and they've been, in some respects, your version of what happened to your predecessor, where regents are essentially stepping out to criticize the system in public.
I don't think there's any comparison at all. The 3 new regents we have are terrific. And in fact, I'm heading out to talk to Kevin Eltife today. We've got a great relationship. Much like, the earlier conversation we had on the Senate. You need regents to ask the hard questions.
Right.
And frankly, again, this is what's going to make our system administration better. When the regents come in and ask the hard questions, whether it's publicly or privately, and I have a requirement to respond to that, can we continue to reduce the full-time employees? But I have an obligation also to say, well, let me tell you the work we have done. And maybe we find the sweet spot.
So you think, Chancellor, that the criticism that has, again, been public about the operation of the system from some of these regents may simply be uninformed?
No, I don't know that it is uninformed. I think it is, continuing to discipline the system. Yeah. Now, they are new regents, and whether or not, Senator Eltife sitting on in his role as a senator or Regent Longoria, but they weren't immersed in the system administration.
So, although Regent Longoria had been Regent Longoria previously,
certainly, that was
but it was in olden days comparatively. Correct. I get that. Is it correct? This came up in the context of one of these stories about concerns within the regents in some quarters about system, that the system's administrative office's budget has gone from $57 million in the 2015 fiscal year to $143 million this year. Is that correct?
So again, you have to understand how the system administration works. We have taken the burden from the campuses and brought a lot of that up to systems so that they don't have to bear the costs. So this was
these numbers are misleading, you think?
Well, what I think is, if you go back to, you can go back to maybe 2010. And what you see is the number of full-time employees and the budget at the system administration was at a peak. Francisco Figueroa drove it down a little bit, and then really starting in about 2012, after he'd cut some of the full-time employees, it began to grow again.
Creep back up.
And the reason it began to creep back up is because we started taking, again, some of the shared services, the IT services, PeopleSoft, onto the system administration. So while you look at the A&M model of pushing everything down, there is a cost to pushing things down to the individual institutions, particularly the smaller ones.
Right.
So if you bring them up and we aggregate them at the system administration level, their costs are significantly reduced.
So your belief is that these numbers notwithstanding, there is an explanation that actually is a positive spin on this, a story to tell both internally in the system and externally to legislators like, among others, Chairman Seliger, who seems to be somewhat critical of spending decisions by the system at a time when all higher ed, but the system as well, and system campuses are coming to the legislature looking for more money. They say, well, you seem to have a lot of money to spend on a new system building, or you have money to spend on this Houston project, which I want to get to in a second. They may see these numbers and think that you all are behaving in one way, but in fact, you think you're doing good by bringing all this stuff in-house?
Sure, of course. So, I mean, the building, let's take the building as an example.
Yeah.
Right now we are saving just on deferred maintenance. We've got 5 buildings around here in Austin.
Right.
Just on deferred maintenance alone, we're saving $5 million a year.
By putting everybody in the same place?
By not paying the deferred maintenance right now. So
Correct.
we've been saving $5 million a year by not doing anything on some of these old buildings.
Yeah.
Brian McCall, as he takes over O'Henry Hall, will have to pick up those costs, I think. God bless Brian.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, this new building that goes up over time, it will pay for itself and generate more money because we've got lease space. So you can make a case for each one of these, a business case for each one of these. Why we brought certain systems. PeopleSoft is a great one.
Right.
So PeopleSoft is the software used by every one of the campuses, with the exception of UT Austin, the academic campuses, with the exception of UT Austin, to manage everything. It manages their HR, it manages their grants, it manages their students.
Yep.
It is the single software that does all that. It requires an inordinate amount of kind of back-level support, back office support. It requires IT support. Well, if you were to push that down to a Rio Grande Valley or a Tyler or a Permian Basin, they would not be able to afford that. Mm-hmm. By, again, aggregating it at the system level, sure, you've got more money at the system, and you go, my gosh, how much money do you guys have at system administration? Well, what you have to recognize is we have taken that burden on to alleviate it from the campus.
So is that a story that you simply have to tell better? Is this, again, a case of how you communicate the story of the system to the people who may be critical of you, inside and outside?
Yeah, and we try to communicate that story. And it gets back to this session. So I think we did communicate a lot of our stories well. And so when you make the kind of proclamation that this all kind of came together at the end, that's not the true story. The true story is we started working it on day one, and we engaged with donors, and we engaged with X's, and how many countless meetings did I have with members? How many dinners did I have with members to be able to explain to them how we do business and why we do business, and the way we do. And so at the end of the day, some of these came together at the end, but it was not because it was just spontaneous. It was because we did take the time to educate.
You all had worked
throughout.
it.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the Houston situation, which you brought to a close in March, but for a year had been a thorn in the side of some in the Capitol and had been a point of controversy as it related to your administration of the system. This was the decision you made, as I understand it, in 2016 to acquire 300 acres at a cost of $215 million for the purpose of building a campus of sorts, not a new UT regional campus, but a sort of system. It wasn't going to be another UT blank.
No, it was not.
It was going to be
Absolutely.
Where did the money come from to buy this land?
Yeah, so the money is from our PUF allocation. So it was a small percentage. When you take a look at the dollars we are spending on this land, it's between $10 and $12 million a year for the mortgage, if you will, of land that, of course, it is the largest contiguous piece of property in near downtown Houston. So going into this, there was a recognition, again, while it wasn't anything it had nothing to do with a real estate deal, but it was also a recognition that we were buying good property that if for whatever reason didn't work out, we would have the opportunity not to lose and not to lose any money on this. And that was kind of the going in position. So people said you assumed a lot of risk. I would tell you I don't think we assumed any risk.
Right.
But in March, as you said, I made the public statement that, look, this was my fault. Absolutely my fault.
What exactly, Chancellor, was your fault?
Well, I couldn't pull together the shared vision. The idea when I looked at this land was, and to your point, if you're going to do something big, if you're going to swing for the fence, and it wasn't just about the UT system, I wanted to bring all the institutions of Texas together to do something that was kind of focused on research and collaboration, and pulling the task force together, these great folks from Houston and elsewhere, to say, okay, let's. Again, I had my own ideas, but I wanted them to kind of think through this. And of course, what they came up with was this idea of this Institute for Data Science, big data. And if you go take a look at The Economist, I think last month's Economist, and the cover story on last month's Economist was, what is the most important resource in the world today? Data. So the idea was we would build this Institute for Data Science. It would be focused on healthcare. It would be focused on education. It would be focused on energy. And again, the intent was, hey, big tent, everybody come join us.
But if this was a good idea, Chancellor, why were not more people told about this at the front? Because the criticism almost out of the gate was that you were not transparent enough about your intentions, so that legislators found out about it after it was already in the works, including Houston area legislators who were chapped as can be about the impact on the University of Houston. The governor, according to reporting in the Houston Chronicle and elsewhere, was chapped that he was not brought into the loop on this early on, and felt not offended exactly, but he was miffed that you hadn't listened to his perspective on this. I mean, if this was such a good idea, if you were so confident in the value of this idea, why didn't you communicate this to more people early enough in the process?
Well, part of it was, initially to do anything that is kind of campus-like, you have to have real estate.
Yeah.
And I knew that, you can't really go around and talk to 100 people and say, look, I'm thinking about buying some land in Houston, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because then the price of the land just skyrockets, and of course, as a state institution, you have to buy property at essentially a fair market value. So the reason we talk about real estate within the executive session at a board meeting is because there is always concern about the steps that a system is going to take and how that'll drive prices up. But back to the fact that, again, you ask why do I accept the blame? Because, again, I didn't communicate this well enough. But what I had hoped would happen, which didn't happen, what I had hoped would happen was as the task force began to do its work and the people began to see the value of what we were trying to do, then naively so, I was hoping that people would see that, hey, this is really a good idea. And maybe we can all get on board and do this.
People didn't happen.
And it didn't happen.
You acknowledge that the politics of this became too problematic for this to go forward.
During the session, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my concern was the whole issue of Houston was overshadowing all the other great work we were doing. And I'll go back to where we ended up in session.
Yeah.
I knew that if I continued to kind of fight the battle on Houston, and we fought it all the way through the end of the session would not have turned out the way it did.
It would leach over into other things.
Absolutely.
Is it true that some of the presidents on the campuses within the system were concerned that they were going to suffer if we did not get off the topic of Houston, that somehow the backsplash would hit them as well as the system?
Yeah, they never voiced that concern to me, but I'm sure that some of them
You can understand that.
Yeah,
so,
sure,
so
absolutely.
have you and Whitmire hugged it out since you decided not to do this?
Yeah, again, people see things a little differently than I do. I have absolutely no ill will against Senator Whitmire. I thought it was an engaging conversation. So no, I'm not a guy that.
Have you patched things up?
I have. I called him and extended my apologies for the way the discussion went, and he was equally gracious. So yeah. Sure.
How about with the governor? The Houston Chronicle reported that after your meeting with the governor on this issue, at which you disagreed, you and the governor have not had a one-on-one since. Is that true?
No, it's not true.
Okay.
I see the governor at functions all the time. The governor and I just met probably a month ago. And,
why didn't the governor why didn't the governor, when he was asked by the Chronicle to offer a statement of support of your time as chancellor, not do so?
You'd have to ask the governor that.
I would love to have the opportunity at some point. All right. You want to stay in this job, so your job is up, your contract is up at the end of this calendar year. So it's going to be up to the regions if they want to extend you, and it's going to be up to you if you want to be extended.
Correct.
So let's do the second one first. Do you want another time in this job?
Yeah, again, I think we're going to have a conversation with the regions over the next couple of months to figure out, is this grand experiment working in terms of the non-traditional coming in to
Well,
run.
they'll decide whether they think it's working from their perspective.
Yeah.
I'm asking from your perspective. If you got to decide whether to stay in this job, Chancellor, for another term, would you do it?
Well, again, I want to see the direction that the board is going. I need to know
that's not a yes.
Of course. Well, the fact of the matter is, I think there's some things we have to talk about. I've got to find out whether or not the board wants me to stay. I mean, you flip the question, but the first thing is, does the board want me to stay? And if they do, that's a decision point for me.
Right.
I mean, obviously,
if they want you to stay, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sign on. Well,
again, I want to make sure that the match and the relationship between myself and the board, that I'm value added to the board.
Yeah.
If because of some of the things that have occurred over the last couple of years have created friction for the board that aren't appropriate, if I'm not adding value to the University of Texas system, then maybe I'm not the right guy for the job. So, I mean, that's a discussion that I've got to have with the board.
Okay. Yep. Let's go to questions. We have a microphone in the back. Agnes will walk it around. If you have one, please put your hand up. Sir.
Chancellor, as a non-traditional leader, you mentioned that earlier, and by the way, I think the literature suggests about 20% of executives in higher ed are of that label have not come up through the ranks of the academy. What would you speak to as being one of your greatest assets, a trait or a skill that has served you well in this space? And by contrast, anything that you would point to that has been maybe a liability or has been difficult to translate to the space
And this
of
relates to
higher ed?
him not having come up through higher ed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you say?
Well, I think if you're going to balance the pros and cons, I would like to think leadership and understanding kind of how to get things done is something that we do in the military quite a bit. The leadership piece is really how well do you work with people? Can you pull, and irrespective of how people might view my relationship with the legislature, which actually I think is very good, I'd like to think if you went and asked my presidents and my staff whether or not we've got a great working relationship, whether or not we're pulling them together in a way that is moving the institution forward, I think you'd get I hope you would get a positive response from
You
them.
think that I don't mean to interrupt, you think that the legislature, you think, believes it has a good relationship with you and the system right now?
I think it depends on who you talk to.
Well, you know that Chairman Eltife told Matthew Watkins of the Tribune just a couple of weeks ago that he believes, having been a senator and
Right.
having observed this, that this is the worst relationship between the UT system and the legislature in years. That would run counter to what you just said.
So how did the session turn out?
I understand.
I mean, you just laid on it.
Right.
So the PUF was under attack, and that worked out well. You did not get tuition re-regulation. The campuses ended up having, for the most part, some of them got some cut, but in general they worked out well. All of the key issues that we had listed, the formula funding for Dell, the formula funding for RGV, I could go on and on and on. That doesn't occur if it's the worst session that you've ever had.
If it's as bad as,
Right.
as indicated.
So, and again, I think you're going to find individual perspectives that will differ from mine. And does that mean that I think I've got a great relationship with everybody in the Congress or up on the Capitol? Of course not. But again, I'm always happy to engage with them.
Right.
Let me get back to the
Please, I'm
questions
sorry
here at
about
hand,
that,
though. One of the things that I tried to bring to the system that I think is important is if you want to be a great system, you can't just worry about the number of full-time employees. You can't worry just about building occupancy rates. If you want to be a great system, then you have to do great things. You have to really put yourself out there, assume some risks, and try something that is big and bold, that gets the attention, that does things that are good for the people of Texas and for the nation. You have to do things like stand up for the Dreamers, stand up for the First Amendment, stand up for the flag, talk down guns on campus, stand up against sexual assault. If you don't take on the hard issues and stand in front of a microphone and say, you know what, yes, I think the First Amendment is the single most important amendment we have, and the press is not the enemy of the American people. If you stand up and say, I think the Dreamers need an education, if you stand up as a Navy SEAL and say, you know what, guns on campus are a bad thing, but I love the Second Amendment, unless you do these things, then you're driving towards mediocrity. Find the tough issues, and stand up for it.
Even Chancellor, if by doing so you find yourself out of sync with the politics of the moment, in a building that ultimately decides your appropriation and other matters of policy for the system, you would rather do the right thing at an inconvenient time.
Every single time.
Okay, sir.
Well, first, thank you for your service to our country. My name is Gavino Fernandez, and I'm a charter member of UT Elementary, and I think that speaks to your pre-K to 12.
Yep.
The shortfall, though, is that when Dr. Berdales, when we started this whole process, and everybody was against it, the Senator Barrientos, our AISD trustee, because it was a charter school. But my question is that if you really believe in that being the cure for having to eliminate the 10% rule, why did y'all stop at the 5th grade?
Yeah,
when we were first doing this, it was going to be all the way to the 12th grade. Right now, all these kids that are graduating, I went to the last graduation. I think, Evans, you received an award. Congratulations. And thank you for your continued support of UT Elementary. But in order for your pre-K to 12 concept to work, the investment needs to be there. And I'm just concerned that our fifth graders, once they finish UT Elementary, they're back to.
Say a word about that, please. What do you think about that?
So, the pre-K through 12, of course, the charter schools are important to us, and we have charter schools, as you know, all around the UT system. But at the end of the day, you're always balancing, resources against, support to the charter schools. We have early college high schools. We have dual credit programs that we're working. So we have a lot going on to kind of support pre-K through 12 because we realize how important that pipeline is to higher education. I'm not sure why the decision was made to stop at fifth grade. I'd need to go back and re-look that.
That's before your time.
Yeah, well before my time. Right. But again, I think that there is, we've got to continue to invest in pre-K through 12. Even, again, we've got to figure out how to do that. I get resourced by the state to do higher education. Having said that, the argument we make is if you don't get the pipeline right, then you're disadvantaging the work you have to do in higher ed.
Right.
So we've got to figure out what that balance looks like. But as I've said before, and to your point, Evan, if you have to take some money from higher ed to put it in pre-K through 12, I'm okay with that, as long as that money is well invested.
Because ultimately, better inputs on the front end of higher ed produce better outputs, right?
Absolutely.
And those better inputs relate to pre-K through 12. Yep. Other questions? Sir.
Richard Ramirez. I think I have to start off by saying I'm a Bachelor of Journalism at the University of Texas.
All right.
So you can't do math either, like us.
At least not publicly.
Right, okay.
I think if I generalize, the average citizen thinks that probably the best ROTC program in the state would be Texas A&M. But if I'm correct, I think the University of Texas just won the equivalent of the national championship this year. And I was just wondering what your advice would be for the current UT ROTC group to kind of capitalize on that momentum and how we could become better known as the UT Austin ROTC program.
How important is that to the campus? Obviously, it's not a big part of the brand of the university as it is at A&M. That's absolutely true. What do you do about that?
Well, one, thanks for asking the question because what it's referring to is the Sandhurst Challenge. And the Sandhurst Challenge has been around for a very long time based on Sandhurst Military School in the UK. But there were something like 272 teams from around the nation, ROTC teams, academy teams that came together to do this kind of combat, if you will. It's all kind of combat related, navigation, how you shoot, how you throw these dummy grenades, all this sort of stuff. And the University of Texas at Austin came in #1 out of 272 teams.
That's great.
I had an opportunity to bring over, and it's co-ed team, so I had an opportunity to bring the young men and women who were on the team over to my office and talk to them for a while. Great young Americans. One, I love the work that goes on at A&M on this. I mean, when I was a senior in high school, I thought A&M would be a great fit for me as well. I was interested in going into the Corps, long-term going into the Navy. So I think what they do at A&M is terrific. I hope they continue to spread the work that goes on in the Corps. It brings great officers into the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. We've got a great program at UT Austin, as well as some of our other institutions around. So it's all good work.
Good.
Yeah.
Ma'am.
So recently there was an announcement that Austin Community College is going to offer a bachelor's degree in nursing, which I think is a good thing because there's a decrease in the number of nurses. Right. But is this a new trend, and how does it impact higher ed at four-year institutions?
You feel good about the community colleges being able to play in your space, and you're welcome to look at Dr. Rhodes right in the face, wherever he is, and say that.
No, and I made that public statement during the session. I support the community colleges having four-year degrees in certain areas. And again, I think what we've got to work with the community colleges on is, is it the right? If the community college all of a sudden becomes a four-year institution that is about granting more and more degrees, and I think it really kind of undermines the role of the community colleges if it goes too broadly. Yeah. The resources will eat them up, the tuition costs will rise. I think there's some things got to look at. But in general, I'm very supportive of the more education, the better. Yeah. I mean, that's my philosophy.
More than half of the higher ed enrollment in the state of Texas right now is in fact in community colleges, and they're both a pipeline to the world, and in many cases a pipeline to your institution.
Well, absolutely. The young men and women that come out of the community colleges, as we have found, are very well prepared to come into their junior and senior year, and we appreciate that.
Let me take one more, and then we'll wrap it up, sir.
All right, Chancellor McRaven, Ken Flippin, a graduate of the LBJ School.
Good.
I want to thank you first for your service to the country as well as the university, and say, one of the things that is in the news today, of course, is President Trump's decision on the Paris climate change. And one of the issues that we've been working on, I've been working with students on campus as well as Environment Texas, and we've been approaching the administration about the methane that's being released on UT campus, and or excuse me, on UT lands.
UT lands, right.
And one of the things that you've made a commitment to do the best we can to exceed standards. But we've also asked, and I know that Luke Metzger with Environment Texas spoke with you about this, about the formation of a methane task force so we can find the best technology out there. There's a lot of states that are leading in doing recapture of methane. Can you talk about what the university is doing when it comes to this and how we can be a leader to show other, in the light of the nation, federal government stepping back, what can we do as a state institution to make a difference when it comes to climate change?
And by the way, if you want to take your opportunity to do one of your standing in front of a microphone and telling hard truth moments about the Paris Climate Accord, feel free to do it.
Yeah, I am absolutely in favor of the Paris Climate Accord. Yeah. So make no mistake about that. I mean, when you look at if we back out of the Paris Climate Accord, I think along with Nicaragua and Syria, that's where we're going to be. And it gets back, and it is a broader issue about leadership. Is this the way we want the nation to lead by pulling out of this accord? Now, are there problems with the accord? Of course there are. There are anytime you bring in 100+ countries into the world of climate control. Yeah. So yeah, I think we need to continue to support those. But frankly, I'm not alone. You look at Rex Tillerson, former CEO of Exxon. I think he understands the oil and gas business, and Rex supports staying in the accord as well. To the point about methane, I did have a great conversation with Luke, and what I would like to do, again, we want to drive down our methane emissions as low as we possibly can. We have a fiduciary responsibility, obviously, to generate revenue from those university lands, because that's what does help educate the 228,000 students we have and do the great things for Texas. But I am a big believer in the environment and protecting the environment. So we'll find a way to work together again, I'm not opposed to a task force. I want to make sure I understand the nature of it and what the framework would look like. Back to the data, I need to understand the data. Luke and I were talking, are we cherry picking the data to make the way our methane emissions look better? I don't know. I hope that's not the case. I know we are below national standards. The way it has been depicted to me a number of times, we are below national standards. I can tell you Mark Hauser, who runs our university lands, absolutely committed to working to lower the methane emissions. So we need to figure out a way to do that, and I'm all about it.
Okay. Chancellor, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Good to see you. Thank you all very much, Chancellor McRaven. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Sure, you bet.